So Jeffrey was saying that this piece was put together last evening, and all the components of the piece were dispersed on the floor. So it took up the entire space, and it can never be put together the same way twice, and that makes a lot of sense. What I was compelled by were the drywall screws that hold it together, and the C-clamps.
Yeah, me too. Because you see this right here, and just the real straightforwardness of it. Using just off-the-shelf hardware store screws as all the assembly points. I think that's really...
But the contrast has to be with Chamberlain and Chamberlain's work, and how dealing with steel versus plastic in a whole different car industry, and what impact means, right? So impact, the crunching impact of Chamberlain's work versus the breaking brittleness.
Right, but also the plastic is made to be resilient. It's made to bounce back from impact instead of just absorbing, crumple, and
but it sounds differently, right? When you understand, you can hear the sound of impact and how that is different. So interesting. But the form and the scale is similar, right? Chamberlain verticality. I mean, this has a bit of.
This is more spherical than most Chamberlain.
Right, but it's still a figure. It's not dispersed. It all comes together as a figure. I think some of the juxtapositions are really terrific. The juxtapositions of these paintings and the kind of vernacular quality. They're much more pop, obviously, but I do like the play of the relationship to some of the vernacular elements, even though they're displayed. But maybe it has to do with the contouring of the canvases, right? So it's not, it's a kind of geometry, but the areas are...
It's like a fender.
It's like a fender.
It's the and there's also the patterning on the ice cream cone and the patterning of the grill, or whatever the heck this thing is. The automobile is part of the everyday, just like the ice cream cone, the teapot, the folding chair, the shirt, and the palette.
Right. That there are sources from the everyday that underscore these works. But these three paintings, also I think that how you have the Formica finish also makes reference to, again, not only the everyday.
It's a tabletop.
Tabletop, yes, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. But the slickness of the lines, the contour, the way paint is laid down, the positive and negative shape, I mean, they're very lyrical. So one, even though we're looking at almost pop references, particularly with the ice cream cone, they end up being very lyrical in terms of the shapes and the contours, the line quality, and even the color, right? So it's not really found color, it's interpreted color. So again, this is what's different. You can see pop elements, but you wouldn't put them in necessarily a direct lineage with the 60s and pop work, despite some of the vernacular elements being pulled from the everyday. So there's a lot of kind of consideration, formal consideration, beauty, invention in terms of other vocabulary that reinforces, again, ice cream cone, teapot, folding chair, shirt, and so forth. And I mean, what is this, Brad? I mean, I don't have any idea where that's being pulled from, but I trust that it's coming from the everyday.
Right, and well, that's what's interesting about this one in the middle. The two that are flanking it, you have your references very clearly drawn out. However, this sort of handle-like passage, this contour line, what is that? If you're looking for referential.
Yeah, no, I think that things float very much like things float on screens, right? And so again, that's very different than the accumulation or collecting of, if you think about Rauschenberg or Johns, or even I wouldn't go as far to talk about the photorealists, but anyways, the pop elements, you feel the kind of physicality of those things, the weight of them, whether it's silkscreen. Here, there's something about how images and color floats and dissolves, which is very much of a relationship to the digital world and information economies, just in terms of how things are pulled and floated. So there's that element that I think give them a very contemporary sense. Yeah, I think I'm really compelled by the objecthood of them and the rounded corners and what you were saying as being tabletops, but still having a kind of orientation and still taking a hierarchical position on the wall. There's still a top and a bottom to these works. let's shift to the palette reference, which is actually quite funny. This piece ends up, the more you look at it, the more kind of funny and ironic it becomes in terms of its reference. Earlier when we were looking and walking through, the thing that pulls me into this work is all the, what were you talking about? Well, yes, the joinery too, but also the process left behind, the kind of crumbs and filings of wood as it was put together in space, brings you into the process of it coming together. And that somehow it's unique in this space, that things had to be filed off or drilled, and some of those little indications, those sandings and filings are still accumulating on the floor or on a piece of stock wood.
Well, it's also really kind of funny because there's some very traditional wood joining techniques, such as a dowel and a drilled hole, and let's assume that that's the only joinery there, maybe with wood. But then the attempt to use wood filler to kind of clean it up when it's sort of unnecessary.
Yeah.
And so there's different levels of finish in the craft here that I find intriguing.
Right, and for what end, right? So you still have
for a stupid palette.
Yeah, well, no, for the illusion of illusion of something that's discarded, like a palette, right? That there's.
I think that's what the artist was intending, was to overemphasize the joinery and the tradition of woodcraft for something as completely uninteresting as a palette. The one on the left reminds me a lot of Moholy-Nagy and his moving, light reflecting objects in spaces where this feels like it freezes one of those kind of movements and reflections.
Yeah, no, it's early 20th century analog meets digital processes, and it does it quite well, kind of perfectly in terms of nodding to those two very different sources and processes. I think finally, though, they do deal with phenomena, right? Color, space, and then high degrees of abstraction, where it's not photography as documentation,
right?
But dealing with
it's using those tools to create abstractions,
right?
Yeah. Though I do keep thinking about Caspar David Friedrich in this one.
Why is that?
Because this sort of landscape form, feeling the clouds, and here's and you don't see it here, but there's the thought about the figure, or you as the viewer, me and you as the viewer standing here, experiencing, as you mentioned, phenomena and the great vastness of.
Well, no, I think that's right.
Beyond man.
Yeah, no, it's the space, right? It's the kind of inability to understand the vastness of that space. It's not literalized in the space of the photograph, but it's something much larger or much smaller. The macro and the micro gets played out here as well as it does in a lot of work within the exhibition. Yeah, I just want to quickly point out the, again, taking abstract form, right? That has a reference to painting because you see the weave.
Exactly. You really want to just hit it with your finger and see if that's canvas, right?
Yeah.
You see, especially on these curves, the weave of the canvas or the linen, the fabric that's in there.
But clearly it's working in a traditional minimalism, but then the juxtaposition with almost this glass-like painting of, again, slatboards. Of a domestic piece of architecture, that nice juxtaposition of taking the abstract and seeing its reference in the everyday.
Yeah.
No, and it's also the stacking that's happening, not within the clapboard, but also within this little painting, within the venting, the little vent that's at the peak of the roof, and then or the gable, and then even
all this horizontal banding.
Yeah.
You could also make it a jump from sort of banal domestic to institutional, because this increasing scale of each element here does remind me of Guggenheim.
Yeah, the telescoping. Yeah. So you have the stacking that happens here and the horizontal repetition, and then you have grid structure.
Grid structure, but it references pool tiles.
Yeah, well that's
and the nice pairing of the two.
I know.
The two artists' works that reference the swimming pool.
No, it's so funny because it's not, you don't, I mean, you see all these indicators and artifacts of swimming or leisure, right? This is what you're talking about in terms of, was it Katz? Who are you making reference to?
Well, Alex Katz, you could, I was arguing for David Hockney. Yeah,
yes.
Because this...
Hockney's pools, it's the light, don't you think?
It's the light, it's the, well, in early Hockney, you have the kind of commingling of painting and drawing with graphite on a canvas, which you see on the pair on the right. And on the left, you think about Hockney's actually Polaroids of swimming pools, and you have this repetition of all these little squares that feel like, you know, just in a referential way. Hockney's large format groupings of Polaroids. And his well-known swimming pool works.
But then going into a place of abstraction, you think about Jack Whitten and his distribution of a kind of visual language. So finally, with both of these works, you know, even though you have a kind of foreshortening that's happening, a perspective that happens in the paintings on the right, and the flattening out of the grid structure here, you're still thinking about geometries in space. And then you start filling it in with leisure. That leisure may be making reference to poolside, or color or light, or a different geographic location.
I like that it moves back and forth too. And also, this is the bottom of the pool or the sidewall of the pool. So you're actually underwater.
What you encounter.
Or you're in an empty pool because you're the guy cleaning it at the beginning of the season. Or the end of the season.
Or you're looking down and your feet are just off of, out of view. That's true. And
I love that blue. That blue is amazing. Whatever blue that is, whatever you want to give that blue.
It's dense and chalky. What surprised me about both of these works is that you can still feel the movement of the object that's being recorded, again, within the geometry of the support of the painting, right? So you still, the wonkiness, it still feels like a textile. It's a textile that is a rectangle, but you can feel the movement of the textile, the body of the textile, and its tension within the edge of the canvas, in both cases. And the one on the right is different. I mean, by the fact that it has an orientation. There, you can't, where this one, you could almost rotate it based on.
It's very different, because you have this border.
That's still a picture, it's a mapping,
this border that feels textile-like, but then you have, this feels parchment-like.
Right. But you also have the orientation of the cats, right? The cats as a motif in terms of the kind of compass effect. And this painting here is what was important to us because it did receive an award. And it has a discreteness, and not that it doesn't have a relationship in color or in size to other works in this gallery or in the exhibition, but it ends up having a relationship with visual language that ends up being discrete because there's multiple languages going on. You have the gradation, the illusion where you can pop in, but it also flips out. You know, how color is used and the tensions of color, particularly violet and green, and how kind of aggressive that can be. And then how it's held together by these other motifs. So each application of paint, the choice of color, almost breaks down into a kind of sign. A quotation, right? So you start thinking about somebody like David Reed, or you think about painting in the 80s where everything would break down and have a kind of representation that would come together and challenge its own systems of values, its own histories.
And like Peter Halley as well.
Absolutely.
The representation.
With the conduits and the cells and how you move, how you move from one to the other. So you have illusion becomes not something that's just natural and accepted to painting, but it becomes, you start questioning it in terms of it being a lie or being deceitful or it being manipulative in terms of how the viewer thinks about over, under, what's behind, what's in front. And sometimes it's physical, and that's what I really like about this painting, this particular frame, which is really built up. I mean, you can see how the topography of this paint, how it's laid down with a palette knife, but then you have this illusion that makes it, pushes it even farther forward than the physical topography of the paint itself. So you get all these plays that are happening. So it really ends up being somewhat you know, critical and using, again, different vocabulary of paint to create these tensions.
That's a pretty sophisticated palette, too. And actually the gray wall, though it complements many of the works here, it really works a lot with this painting because these violets, these gray violets, become a lot warmer and more pronounced in their warmness because of that wall.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and so just the nice warm, cool contrast that's going on in this painting.
Yeah, no,
I gravitate towards that a lot, and also the painting right over there with the eggs. Same scenario. It feels like a very cool palette, but on further investigation, it's a really strong juxtaposition of that warm, cool. Yeah. That's my theme for today: warm, cool.
Is that one of your themes?
Yeah, one of my themes.
Oh, you are a formalist. You do like formal issues. But one last thing about this painting, and you know how much I gravitate to painting that is self-reflexive, where a lot of painting, a lot of work in the exhibition is working within traditions and trajectories of art history, right? Where this one starts to disrupt those things. As we were thinking, again, a relationship to criticality and postmodern discourse in the 80s, everything being self-aware. So it's nice to have this.
Very self-aware. I like that. Yeah.
We should talk about this piece because we also gave this piece an award.
Again, being very self-aware about the painting. I mean, you have that. You have the stretched linen on the
stretcher bar. Or what do you call them? Stretcher bars?
Well,
support.
Because of that linen stretched on it, it directs you to think about that as the stretcher bar.
Yeah, I would think that it doesn't have the same criticality as the painting by the fact that even though it is, it's revealing its making, right? You can see where the linen had to be cut to be able to be for it to wrap around the support, right? You can see the rabbit skin glue. You have that always crystallizing, right? Which is very important. The joints, absolutely. A little, I don't know, maybe that's a little fill in the poplar and the pine. And then you have a kind of repetition that happens. So there's a literalness to this piece, which, it has a little bit of almost a play with somebody like Tuttle, right? That kind of direct, almost found, not a lot of affect going on. It has, some of the iconography or some of the tropes of painting. You have linen, you have a support, but at the same time, there's no picture being made to some degree. You're just given the materials of painting.
Yeah.
A wooden support, rabbit skin glue, that saturates linen.
But you could argue that these two implied shapes are very much a formal vocabulary.
Oh yeah. Right, but coming not through picture making, but coming through object making.
Yeah, it does have a kind of a Tuttle feel to it, but perhaps more a slowed down.
Yeah.
The consideration of the joints and
it's making, where Tuttle sometimes it's more found.
Just kind of plops it on there.
Here you really get a sense of the making of it, yes, the wrapping. And the craft actually that comes with it, the kind of very specific corners, I think slows one down. I mean, that becomes the event, or a event in this very reductive work. Let's talk about the furniture piece.
Yeah.
Again, making reference to structure. Yeah, again, deceivingly simple or recognizable, or a combination of, again, a relationship to things in the everyday. The fact that it was kind of homogeneously covered in this black paint, these three elements. You have a base, you have a settee structure, and then you have a chair. The chair caning that lines the sides always makes reference to, for me, Picasso and painting, as things from the world became attached to painting. So chair caning, and it's
Picasso would be jealous of this one.
You think so? Yeah, he would.
Yeah, he would. He would say, "I should have made that."
Yeah. No, for me, this piece is about the negative space. It goes both ways. It's about the kind of potential, kind of a social relationship between two bodies that can sit on the settee and the single body. So you're looking at three potential figures, possibly four. So you have bodies and how these bodies become kind of commingled, but also from a formal position, like the beauty that is being articulated in the negative space as you see through it.
Yeah.
Yes, or then the punctuated space announced by the chair caning.
And the removal of all the upholstery reveals the beautiful linear form that I think is really successful. Like the piece we just talked about, the palette piece, the joinery is very obvious and straightforward and clear. But most of it is abutted, whereas there were mortises cut out and pegs. Here, you just have a few assembly points.
Right,
For
some
really
pegs,
kind of what becomes a very complicated composition in space with very, very few assembly points.
Yeah. No, and there's a, despite it, despite the surface of all three of these elements, literally being painted, stained, made black, that allows you to see the stapling, a kind of the process of the thing itself, right? Yeah. So you could see where the upholstery was attached through some stapling and the kind of rough.
Bandsaw cut this, and it wasn't sanded. Sorry.
But what I think is also interesting is the areas that were, in its life as furniture, where it was nicked and scraped and cut. You also see an index of these pieces being used at some point. Yeah. So you see both, a kind of indication of its history being revealed, another kind of archaeology.
Yeah.
Yeah. I do very much like the juxtaposition of this piece. Again, some domestic elements, functional domestic elements being made abstract. We've seen that a lot, whether it's painting, photography, or sculpture. And the same thing that's happening when we juxtapose this piece with, again, a kind of blackening of, through caustic and through leather and through kind of tacks, this other kind of abstraction that happens with these three paintings that hold up as a unit. Behind it. So it's really nice to look through the space of this sculpture into these three elements that again have a kind of repetition that plays off of the chair caning in terms of its tacks, and then the stitchery, the kind of joinery that happens within the piece itself. So it's a nice juxtaposition, and this whole wall dealing with a real kind of graphic quality, and not only graphic in terms of its relationship to black and white, or some really kind of popping colors, but in terms of the physicality of the paint in the kind of text-like painting, or in the resist that happens in the painting at the edge of the wall, and how these abstractions move into work that just makes me gives me such pleasure, and that is the blueberry pancakes.
I'm getting hungry.
You're goofy.
Well, it's a view out the back window of a car.
Right, but it's very.
Or at least that's my impression by this framing device and those two rectangles.
Well, some kind of vehicle in which the viewer is in one location, and then looking into, a darkened environment in which something fantastical happens, and strange and arresting and dreamlike, and the painting and the painting quality, reinforce all of that. It's quite a pleasure. Same thing that's going on in this particular painting with, hats and fish and clothing. It looks like our daughter's bedroom in terms of fantasy, right? And how things are popping through.
Not unlike the domestic interior of these two paintings.
Exactly.
Down here.
Right, and these works I'm really very, very fond of. These works are very strong for me only by the fact that, they have that relationship to recording something, again, that's very familiar to us, these spaces, these intimate spaces of bodies, bedrooms for the most part, but how they're punctuated by screens, and how drawing can happen on those screens, or communication can happen, screens becoming portals to that space outside of this intimate domestic space, or even drawing, right? Here we have somebody drawing, making reference to, the figure's feet next to them. So this kind of recording, and it's a transporting outside of the space where bodies are, spaces that hold people. So there's something. And again, it's the confidence of the paint, the speed in which it's painted. Again, a kind of idiosyncratic, both drawn, both painted, a heightened sense of color. But what's different is, again, we've seen this before, but the contemporary play of screening is really quite, the introduction of screens as little escape elements is pretty great.
See a lot of those in this painting as well. There's this linear structure in the foreground of this painting, but in these small spaces in between, you almost get a sense of landscape behind there.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's what, again, something I've been bringing up a lot is my conversation with Jeffrey in terms of, what is micro, what is macro? Like, these are big spaces, big landscape spaces, or are they small, little intimate spaces? And they flip. So much work in this exhibition allows for both of those kinds of projections. Yeah.
I don't think it should go unmentioned how much I like this piece.
Well.
Can we just do that?
And I like that piece as well. No, it's you like the galvanized.
The materials is a beautiful juxtaposition of the soft textiles and the hard steel, but the steel is sort of humble, galvanized sheet steel, but with a beautifully curved and intention because of the textiles.
But this goes back to what we were saying in our artist statement too, where we're working at a real interesting point in time in which there is no separation between the crafts and high art, in which there was not too long ago. So to include a vessel as kind of imaginative and beautiful and about these kind of odd seams, or these vessels over here where the inside, the negative space, you start to think about the vessel and philosophy in terms of Heidegger as opposed to craft, which you could also think about in terms of craft or surface. Exciting.
Really nice. And a very nice installation by the crew, who installed with great sensitivity.
Well, and I think that speaks to the fact that meaning can be added value, in other words, in the right juxtaposition of work, where it can help. All the work in here can stand on its own, but when it's reinforced and juxtaposed, you can create new meaning, new references by really smart juxtapositions. And credit goes to the great people at this place in terms of being sensitive to that. Yay!
Well done.
Well done.